Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar on Sustainable Business Kickstarting a Decade of Action. I'll be your moderator for today. I am Susie Golding, and I'm Business Unit Director of Mullenlow Salt Singapore. I oversee a team working in brand purpose and sustainability communications for global and regional brands. I'm also chair of the Marketing and Communications Committee for BritCham, which seeks to share best practice in marketing and comms with chamber members and the wider Singapore business community. This event is also supported by the Sustainability Committee, which seeks to educate and showcase corporate responsibility issues and practices in Asia. We're delighted today to bring you an event about the UN Sustainable Development Goals and how your business can play a part. A commitment to sustainability has been gaining global momentum, with many countries, companies and individuals making their mark. 2020 marks 5 years from the launch of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, a shared vision to end poverty, rescue the planet, and build a peaceful world by 2030. While progress has been made, the world is not on course. Change is happening on many fronts, but not uniformly around the world. A step change really needs to happen to help get the 2030 agenda back on track, and businesses in Asia will play an important role. Integrating sustainability into a business can be overwhelming. As part of the Chamber's Road to Net Zero series, this event is designed to help you get started and how to turn good intent into actions and results. Today, you'll hear short presentations from each of our 4 panelists, and I'll then moderate a panel discussion around the topics they've shared. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can find the Q&A function on the floating toolbar, and questions will be taken towards the end of the panel session. This session, I need to also let you know, will be recorded. So I'd now like to briefly introduce all of our speakers. So first up, we have Esther Chang. Esther is the Executive Director of Global Compact Network Singapore. She leads GCNS initiatives to raise awareness and adoption of corporate sustainability efforts in Singapore and the region. And she serves as the main liaison between GCNS and the United Nations Global Compact. Passionate about creating positive change in society and problem solving, Esther has dedicated her career in the non-profit sector and has worked for leading healthcare and education organisations, as well as grassroots NGOs in Canada and Singapore. She champions multilateral partnerships to responsibly invest in and develop sustainable solutions at scale. And she's an active volunteer in human rights and social welfare causes. I'd also like to introduce John Laws. John Laws is a Managing Director and Head of Government and Regulatory Relations and Policy Asia Pacific at Barclays, based here in Singapore. In this role, John acts as a global relationship and escalation point with all primary regulatory, government and policy bodies within the region. He also plays a key role in ensuring a coordinated response to G20 developments and all related regional regulations, along with key engagements with regulatory supervisors. Our next guest today is Dave McKernis. Dave leads the customer success team at Care, where he is responsible for delivering Care's brand experience across their regional air conditioning as a service portfolio. With a background in consumer marketing, Dave specializes in customer insights that drive Care's product development and customer engagement platform. As an advocate of the circular economy and the product as a service business model, Dave regularly shares experiences with large MNCs and startups who are looking to transition to this disruptive business model. Dave is also the current chair of the Built Environment Group for BritCham, having served on the committee since 2016. And finally, we have Andy Last, who is founder and CEO of Mullenlow Salt and joins us from the UK today. Andy co-founded Mullenlow Salt in 2000. He advises brands and corporates on social purpose and sustainability communications, and is a regular speaker and commentator on the power of business to lead positive change. Andy is a B Corp ambassador and a member of the Meding Group think tank. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker to take the floor, Esther.
Hello, hi, thanks so much, Susie. We can just move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I represent Global Compact Network Singapore, GCNS. We're the local chapter of the United Nations Global Compact. We're the largest voluntary corporate social responsibility initiative. We have over 13,000 companies currently, and it's adding every day, sign on to the compact. And collectively, we're committed to take action for the Sustainable Development Goals. Now you're here today because you're interested to learn more about sustainability, or perhaps you're already on the journey. There's a lot of packed into this word sustainability, from 17 SDGs to the 169 targets, not to mention all the different frameworks, standards, and benchmarks. It can get quite overwhelming, to say the least. But what it boils down to is this mission. We want to collectively build a future in which communities are uplifted, natural resources are used responsibly, and no one is left behind. And what this means for business is the need to take on a holistic view of success metrics that's beyond economics. It takes into the account of social, human, and natural capital. Next slide, please. So now the private sector is one of the key engines of our economy and plays a significant role in contributing to building a sustainable future. As a leading voice for corporate sustainability, we, GCNS, believe that responsible business practices combined with collaboration and innovation can bring about powerful changes. Today, SMEs present over 90% of business globally and 55% of GDP in developed economies. Therefore, all businesses, no matter the size, are critical to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. The conversation on sustainability at this point has really moved far beyond it's a nice to have. Sustainability makes business sense. There are many economic evidence supporting this, right? Embedding sustainability can help lower the cost of capital, result in better operational performance, enhance stock prices, improve long-term resilience and growth. So based on these financial impact, it is a no-brainer really for companies and investors to incorporate environmental, social, and governance, commonly referred to as ESG, considerations in their decision-making process. Next slide, please. Now, embracing sustainability essentially boils down to embracing change. It's a mindset. Here, we've identified 5 stages to the journey of embracing change for sustainability. First, it's awareness. A starting point is the inward assessment of your company's core values as well as the relationship to its stakeholders. Asking yourself some very fundamental questions, like what is my company's purpose? What impact does company's action have on the environment, employees, the broader community? Second is acceptance that we are facing an existential crisis. There is a problem. Accepting that your company's actions could have, or maybe in the future, contribute to a set of systemic sustainability problems. Third, assessment. So this is now an investigative stage and it requires listening, learning, and paying more attention to the situation at hand. It also involves, being open to opinions that may be different from your own, talking to your stakeholders. This requires dedication of time to measure, monitor, and analyze the situation so you can craft an appropriate course of action and set the right targets. Fourth is adoption. Now, this is taking ownership of the problem and acting on the plan. Adopting corporate sustainability begins with a principle-based approach to doing business. The UN Global Compact has outlined 10 universal principles on human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. Now, these are foundational elements anchoring a company's approach to the SDGs. And integrating the principle-based approach is a leadership decision. While subtle, this is a very critical step to change. So now you can read more about the 10 principles on our website. Now, finally, having practiced step 1 to 4, the last stage is where you influence and inspire collective action. Now, examples of this are bountiful. We hear many companies stepping up and pledging to go carbon neutral or even carbon negative by 2030, or even grassroots movements like the Me Too and climate strike. But advocacy can start much closer to home on a smaller scale. You can help others, be it your family members, employees, colleagues, managers, suppliers, to embrace change by talking more openly about your sustainability efforts and commitments. Next slide, please. Now, to get you started, we have outlined 3 simple actions for you to consider. First, to get you started in this change framework, we have developed an in-house sustainability assessment tool. This is particularly helpful for SMEs or those early on in their sustainability journey. The RISE tool quantifies your company's efforts against key international sustainability standards, such as the SDGs and ISOs. It gives performance scoring that enables you to track your company's progress and gaps. Second, do take a moment to check out the UN Global Compact Library. It provides a wealth of information on numerous sustainability topics, and they all offer free of cost, so do take advantage. Third, we encourage you to start measuring and monitoring your carbon emissions. Our CERT tool can help companies easily measure and monitor their environmental impact. All you need to do is input figures from your business's daily activities, such as figures from your electricity bill to calculating your business travel. And then the tool will help you convert it into your company's carbon footprint. Now, once you have a benchmark set, a baseline, it will be easier for you to make emission reduction efforts and work towards your emission targets. These are just some simple steps to get you started. Next slide, please. Well, the steps outlined may seem small, but small steps go a long way. Now, taking on the sustainability journey is doing right by humankind and the planet, but it is also the smart and pragmatic decision in order to build back better, stronger, and more resilient. The world today is facing challenges of a monumental level, and we must not waste this crucial opportunity to reimagine, redesign, and transform the way we work and live. We are in a decade of action, and it's never been more pressing for us to step up our efforts to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. Thanks. Back to you, Susie.
Thanks so much, Esther. Some great starting points there for any business who is just starting out on their sustainability journey. Thank you. Okay, can I ask John Laws to take the floor now, please? Thanks, John. John, you're on mute.
Yep, I'm all right now. Sorry about that. Yeah, thanks very much, Susie. And I'm very grateful and happy to share with you all the Barclays journey. Esther, I didn't have your sustainability mindset up in front of me when I was going through my notes here, but I trust you'll see some components of it embedded through this. Our commitment in Barclays to sustainable and green finance began many years ago, but frankly was probably motivated commercially. It was more reactive to the market. Green funds wanted to buy green bonds, and so we needed to find green issuers. If I review 2018, we had a lot of distractions. We were setting up a ring-fenced retail bank in the UK. We were setting up an infrastructure entity to support the operations of both the retail and the institutional business, exiting our Africa business, building out our US and our Irish banks, and battling a complexity that was Brexit and is Brexit. And I reflect on this because amongst all of these business priorities, it's important for firms to find a social purpose, and climate change became a big part of that for us. On that front, we focused on growing financing of green and renewable energy sources. We created a coal statement, and we began to transition ourselves away from using higher carbon energy sources and tangibly reduce the carbon footprint of our own operations and our supply chain. We built out our own investments in green bonds in our portfolios, providing further support to the market and issuers. We developed green mortgage, green trade finance, green deposit products for our clients. And we put in place a research group to outline the green investment proposition and launched ESG indices to enable that investment. In early 2019, we released an improved climate change and energy statement. This prescribed the activity we could lend to, carving out companies overly reliant on coal. It still enabled us to continue to lend to companies transitioning to renewable energy. We became one of the 30 founding banks of Principles of Responsible Banking, aligning with UN SDGs and a first step towards aligning with the Paris Agreement. At the same time, the PRA, our primary regulator in the UK, issued a supervisory statement requiring a quantitative approach to exposures on our balance sheet, looking at various scenarios and building stress tests to gauge outcomes. We continued, however, increasing financing to environmental and social segments to £35 billion, up 25% from 2018. In mid-2019, however, we realised we hadn't taken our commitments to Paris far enough. We needed to tighten our climate change statement, more closely accord with Paris, so we began redrafting it. Towards the end of 2019, we received a challenge from a shareholder group. That was fine. Engagement with investors, our owners, is critical. We were aligned, in fact, and the ultimate resolution passed in our recent AGM went further than the proposal from the shareholder group. We announced our intention to be a net zero bank by 2050. This is not just our own emissions, by many accounts we're there already, or even including our lending exposures, but also includes all of our capital markets activities. So net zero means the sum of our client financing activities lead to zero CO2 by 2050. Saying this is one thing, it is now a huge task to accurately measure and report on this. Managing the transition with a range of clients, likely thousands of clients, although well-intentioned, are not as advanced in their own green operations. Much of this work to track greenhouse gas emissions is in place on loan portfolios. Barclays' ambition is to map all of our bond and capital market activities, which is new territory and will take much of this year to solve. We'll use International Energy Association's guidance and we'll seek assistance from external expert third parties. We have principles to help along that path: increased prohibition on thermal coal with less allowance for transition, no financing for energy projects in the Arctic Circle, no financing for fracking in the EU and the UK, and a stronger due diligence for fracking in the rest of the world. Together with financial targets, we're going to increase green financing to £100 billion by 2030. We're going to commit £175 million to invest over 5 years under a sustainable impact capital initiative, really targeted to scale up companies in this space. Our dialogue with clients today is vastly different than a few years ago. The benefits of greening your operation and seeking green finance is becoming an accepted conversation. And now we need to continue putting these conversations into actions. I hope this provides a base to understand what we've committed to, but it continues to evolve. And a large part of this commitment is to be transparent. So thanks again for the opportunity, and I'll pass it back to Susie.
Thanks very much, John. Really interesting to hear the journey that a big global business has been on, and a big business in the financial sector. I'd like to hand over now to Dave McKerness. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Susie. And thanks for the invitation to be with you guys today. So in 5 minutes, I kind of just want to make one point, and then we can discuss it more in the panel section. And to do that, I want to use what I think is the simplest and therefore the most effective business strategy framework I've come across. So on the left side of your screen, you see a circle which has your product or your service, which essentially is your business. And on the right side, you have what people value. And as business leaders, what we're trying to do is figure out a way to make those things overlap. And the more they overlap, the more successful your business is. So if I use this as context, how do the UN SDGs affect your business? Because I always hear this phrase that the UN SDGs are good for business and they're pro your business. And I think people say that because they wished it was true and they wanted it to be true. But the question is it true? And if I take some examples, if you're in the fossil fuel industry, if you're in the plastics industry, the automotive industry, is sustainability really pro your business? I would argue that maybe it's not. Also, if you're other companies, you probably have staff all over the world. You have office buildings that they need to go to. You use energy in your business operations. You have a carbon footprint. So if you're really going to take on sustainability, you're actually being asked to divest money away from your product and your service, away from your core business, and invest that into mitigating the negative impacts that you have on the environment or your operations have on the environment. So, these time and these resources that are required actually take you away from your business. So next slide, please, Sabina. So if I'm just looking at your business, unless you happen to sell solar panels, which I guess most of you don't, the UN SDGs are not pro your business. In many cases, they're anti your business because they're taking you away from doing what you do. So if that's the statement, and if I believe that statement, why am I here on this panel trying to convince you guys that the SDGs are a good idea for your business? And the reason is because that statement is looking at the wrong circle. It's a very simple strategy and a very simple framework, but there's only 2 circles there and we're focusing on the wrong one. The UN SDGs are not built as a roadmap for more successful businesses. If you can go to the next slide, please, Sabina. The UN SDGs are humanitarian goals, not business goals. So if you look at that circle on the right, it's about your customers. It's not about your business. And another word for humanitarian goals is consumer insights. Essentially what they've done is they've conducted the single largest market research consumer insight study on the planet. They've gone to every region, every country, every market, and they've talked to people and they've asked, what do you value? And the results are very, very clear. They're available for free and they're on this screen. These 17 things are the things that your consumers care about and value. And the thing about the UN Sustainability Development Goals is, as time goes on, they become more valuable to more people. We know consumers change what is relevant to them all the time. They're dynamic. And if you think something like sustainability may be important now to people, imagine what it's going to be like in 2 years' time or 3 years' time. So if you go to the next slide, please, Sabina. So it's not about how they can drive your business and your product and your service, but it's about your customers. If they move and what they value changes and shifts and you don't move with them, it doesn't matter how good you are at what you do, it doesn't matter how great your product is. If it's no longer relevant and those circles don't overlap, you don't have a business. So what I want to do now is share an example with you. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Sabina. So I always come across these two kind of statements. One is, these UN SDGs, they have nothing to do with my business, so it doesn't really concern me. The other is that these are problems for the next CEO to solve. It's 5 or 10 years down the track. So I want to use the example of the airline industry and the SDG focus of good health and well-being. And I think you can probably see where this is going. So in 2019, if you were a big airline and you were thinking about planning for 2020, what were you defending against? What did you think was going to disrupt your business? And how much of a factor was good health and well-being? Now, I assume if you're British Airways or Qantas or Singapore Airways, whatever big airline you're from, good health and well-being was kind of important. You need to have clean planes and good air quality, but it probably wasn't your biggest focus. You were probably focusing on the low-cost carriers and the innovative things that they're doing. But then COVID came along and it made good health and well-being the top priority for every single one of their customers in the world. And if you go to the next slide, please, their business was disrupted by a tech firm, which they may not have heard of, called Zoom, which is now worth $42 billion. So the first thing you need to know is that the UN SDGs can significantly impact your business overnight. The second thing you need to know is that they don't often come in isolation. They tend and they have the habit of coming together. So the reason that the airline industry lost all their customers is because of good health and well-being. But once we get through this, and once good health and well-being maybe falls a bit further down the priority list of our customers, will all those customers go back to the airline industry? And I would argue that they won't. And the reason they won't is because of sustainability. Companies have been looking for decades to figure out ways to reduce their carbon footprint. And travel around the world and business travel was the one thing that was sacrosanct. We couldn't not do it. We had to go to other countries. We had to go meet clients and customers. We had to take staff from A to B, and we had to have face-to-face meetings. So because we had to do that, that was off the table. But now it's on the table again. And if you ask a lot of CEOs of big businesses, their budgets of going into travel will not go back to what they were pre-COVID-19, because they've now found a way to be sustainable, which is important to their customers and important to their employees, and they can now do it through other means and technology. So that's really my message. And if you just go to the last slide, please, Sabina. When you're looking at the UN SDGs and you're evaluating, are these important for my business? Is sustainability important for me? Make sure you focus on the right circle. It's about your customers. It's not about you. And if you focus on your customers, the next thing you have to do is listen when they tell you what they value. And they've told you it's those 17 things that are on the screen. So I look forward to the panel discussion. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks so much, Dave. A really interesting viewpoint around the SDGs and how they should be referred to and looked to for companies on a sustainability journey. I'd like to invite our last speaker, Mr. Andy Last, please.
Thanks, Susie, and hi, everyone. I'm going to talk about my take on the SDGs as well, which I think you'll see some coherence to what Esther and Dave were saying, and maybe some different perspectives, but hopefully that's for rich discussion. Next slide, please. And Dave, I wonder if you could go on mute. Sorry, I'm getting feedback. So I wanted to start, tell you a story about hand washing, because obviously none of us have heard much about hand washing over the last few months, and you may think there's nothing more to say about it, but I think it's a useful model for what I want to talk about, and hopefully we'll give some pointers for how you can use sustainability to improve your business. Next slide, please. So 15 years ago, we were doing some work with Unilever, And I was asked to go to Africa. This is a couple of young men I met in Kibera, which is outside Nairobi in Kenya. And they had a brand called Lifebuoy soap, Unilever, and they wanted me to go and look at one of their CSR philanthropy programs going on there that was bringing hand washing into Kibera. And could I check whether there was a nice story there for them and there weren't any issues? And what I sort of had a profound effect on me, not for the reasons you might think, but because it became very clear to me when I was there that if Unilever brought hand washing to places like Kibera, they would sell more soap, and that would be a really good thing for their business. And it wasn't what Unilever wanted to talk about at the time at all. They wanted to talk about how they were a good social citizen and they were doing good things. But we had a good, healthy debate about that. And if you go on to the next slide, please, Sabina. 15 years later, we're still working with Lifebuoy. It was the brand that brought us to Singapore when we as a business moved to Singapore 8 or 9 years ago now to work with Unilever at the Maple Tree Business Centre. We helped create something called Global Hand Washing Day, which is now in its 11th year and celebrated in up to 100 countries around the world. We ended up writing a book about it, about hand washing and the models it could provide to linking social purpose and positive environmental impacts to your business. And it was described by Professor David Aker at Berkeley as the best social program ever. Now, why was that the best social program ever? I think there was two things going on there that are important for all of us and actually build on what the previous panelists were saying. If we go to the next slide, please, Sabina. The first thing is that it was absolutely in line with consumer insight. There are people who wanted to keep their children safe from disease, and that is captured in the Sustainable Development Goals, Goal 3, again, around health and well-being. And we were sort of in the run-up to the goals being announced, so we lobbied hard to make sure that hand washing with soap was included as an indicator within both Goal 3 and 6. So it's a good social program because it delivers on a key societal and sustainability requirement as outlined in the Sustainable Development Goals that comes from the desires people have all over the world to keep themselves and their family safe from disease. That's half of it. If you go to the next slide, please. The second half was to be absolutely explicit to our internal audiences and external audiences that this was about selling more soap and that there was it was a key driver of the business. And I think this is often where companies can fall down again, because there seems to be an allergic reaction sometimes among businesses to say they are doing good things in order to make money. And I think that is the key to how you can embed sustainability in your business. You have to link it into the business model. In the case of soap, it was very simple. If you get more people using your soap, you're going to sell more soap, but also they're going to be improving their health and well-being. But it applies to any business. You can go to the next slide, please, Sabine. And we've taken this model of looking for the business driver and then looking for the social or positive social or environmental impact across organizations and brands right across the world over the last 15 years, from the very obvious connection there is with a soap brand through to more complicated issues around agrochemicals or the alcohol industry. But the same model applies to all of them. If we go to the next slide, please. And the first one is to find what the business driver is that you are trying to address and that you can address in this way. Is it around increasing sales, as we saw with that case of Lifebuoy soap? You can increase sales by identifying new consumers, if you like, at the bottom of the pyramid, or in terms of many consumer goods, it can increase sales by getting you front of store or front of online platforms. Or it can, certainly in many business-to-business tenders now, it's an increasing requirement to put into the RFPs your sustainability impacts. The second thing, is it about improving your marketing? Is it about creating a more interesting narrative that will cut through, particularly with younger consumers now. If you go back, please. Sorry, Sabine. The marketing cut through. So does engaging in a social or an environmental program give you the sort of narratives and sort of stories and messages that can really cut through in a modern media environment? Thirdly, is it about engaging your workforce more, and particularly, if you work in a bank, the sort of people who would the graduates who would automatically be hoovered up by the banks around the world. Actually, the banks now need to be thinking more differently about what is it they're offering and the sort of careers they're offering to young people coming into the workforce. So is your social purpose, your engagement with the SDGs important for employee engagement? And then finally, is it about your license to operate? Does engaging in all those issues that are talked about in the Sustainable Development Goals protect you, protect your business and its license to operate over the coming years? On this business driver, these are the four, as over the last 15 years, these are the four prime business drivers in which engaging in sustainability in its broadest sense can help. And actually with your individual business, we found it's very important to identify which is the key one in there. It might well impact across all of them, but if you identify the key one, it's much easier to integrate sustainability into your business. And then the next slide, please, Sabina. So then the second side is identifying the business driver. The second side is then looking at where the positive impact is. And one of the tools we use here, which we find increasingly extremely helpful, is this, what we call a swords and shields exercise. So in terms of, it was plastics were mentioned before. If you are a plastic, if you're a business that sells plastic bottled water, and we've worked with a number of those over the years, reducing the plastic you're using and the single-use plastic you're using and increasing recycling, all those things are really, really important to do. They're in line with the SDGs, they're an important thing to do, but they are essentially about you doing less bad in the world. And in that case, they're a shield. If you want to go on the offensive and talk about something and use something positive, where you're having a positive impact, it has to be about something else. In terms of bottled water, it may be how you're engaging young people, it may be around improving hydration and health and whatever, but it's a really important exercise which you can go through in any business to identify what are the positives you're bringing to the world and what are the negatives you're removing from the world, and to really try and focus your communication on those swords. If we go on, please, Sabina. This is the model, one of the models with the work that brings in all that, and actually a good sustainability strategy, a good social purpose does 6 things. It aligns to your corporate mission, as Dave was talking to. It has a very strong link to your core product or service, like a soap and health. You have that clear commercial interest, and you understand what that is, and you're open to talking about it. It encourages others to join in, which goes to the advocacy point that Esther was talking about, encourages other people, media, influencers, other organizations to join in. It creates the right narrative for the brand story and the story you want to tell about your business, and it drives engagement across the organization. And actually with any organization, that model is a really helpful framework for building the case. There's a couple more final slides to wrap up on, please, Sabina. In all this, communications is critical, because a lot of the things we're talking about are about creating positive change inside and outside the organizations, and it's impossible to do that without communications and communicating in an appropriate way about what can be sensitive areas. And the next slide, please. And this can be hugely complex. I love the very simple circles Dave brought up, and that is really important. These are complex subject matters, and we have to make them simple, but actually make that simplicity compelling as well, because people need to understand what you're doing, care about it, engage in it, and change their behaviors, which is what a lot of this is about. And those models and others, and other examples, as well as hand washing, are all contained in this next book. If you can move the slide on, Sabina. About hand washing and other things. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Andy. Okay, so we're going to move on to the panel discussion part of the event now. So please, anyone who's tuned in, if you do have a question, stick it in the Q&A tab, and we'll get to your questions towards the end of the session. I'd like to kick off and ask the panel, it's really a question for all of you, but I'd like to put it to Esther first. What do you think the impact of COVID-19 has been on consumer perceptions of sustainability and what they now see as the role played by business in addressing some of the challenges that we face in the world?
I think sorry, can you hear me well? Yeah, okay. I think what COVID has revealed is that we cannot do business on an unhealthy planet, right? And I think it's exposed a lot of issues that were already there, but accelerated the need for change, be it on inequality, be it on health, on across the different SDGs. So I think the demand from the consumers are very, very different, and companies are grappling to trying to find that purpose. How do they fit their products, as Dave rightly pointed out, into that circle of what consumers or customers require, because overnight it's changed very dramatically.
Great, thanks Esther. Andy, can I put the same question to you?
Sure. Well, I completely agree with Esther's core point that you can't do business on an unhealthy planet, so that the things are all interwoven. I certainly think COVID hasn't, I'm not sure it's changed anything. I think it's accelerated all the changes that were happening anyway, in terms of what consumers expect of businesses, in terms of what employees expect of their workforce, in terms of what governments and NGOs expect of business to lean into a lot of these issues. I think the other thing is it's shown how quickly the world can change when we put our mind to it, when there's an emergency there. And a lot of, certainly the issues around climate change, if you look at the changes that have happened on some of the measures there, just simply on air pollution. Now we can't go into this sort of drastic lockdown forever, but I think those changes that have happened in this very short period of time demonstrate that change is possible. And I even wonder if some of the real movement we're seeing on the Black Lives Matter issue at the moment is because the world has, that change is possible, and therefore we can no longer accept a sort of reactionary position on things.
Yeah, it does definitely feel like we're at a moment of change, of pivoting, and it's certainly been triggered by the experience that we've all had during the last few months. Dave, can I put the same question to you as well, please?
Yeah, I think that would be my main takeout as well, is that if the problem is big enough and imminent enough, we can make real change. But then the converse of that is also true, which is if it doesn't seem to have an imminent impact, how can we create change? So I was once asked around sustainability. It's like people keep saying we're fighting a war, and is it like that? And I said not really, because if you're fighting in a war, if you don't take action, you die. Whereas if you don't take action in sustainability, someone halfway around the world in 10 years' time has a slightly different quality of life. It's a very different challenge. So I think we need to address it differently. I mean, COVID showed how quickly we can change, but how do we rally around sustainability and some of these other SDGs if you don't have that immediate required action?
Yeah, that's really interesting, that this sense of immediacy. You're right. If it's a longer term goal that you're aiming at, it's very difficult to get people to act when it's not immediately in front of them. John, the same question to you as well, please.
Yeah, sure. I think as Andy and Esther alluded to, COVID showed us that change can happen very quickly. And in fact, whether it's anecdotally or some early measurements of emissions, the world's contracted and we're getting a bit of an insight into what a cleaner world might look like. But along with that, that's been due largely to the contraction in the economies globally, and that's not sustainable. So I think the really key point here is that we need to come out of this. When we restart economies, we need to be more mindful of the impact on the environment, and we need to think about a green recovery. Recovering in a way that kind of retains some of the benefits that we've seen out of this terrible virus impact.
I just add one note. I think, you know, Dave mentioned about the war and that if we don't fight it, we'll still survive and whatnot. But I think we are at a different point in time. There is a environment crisis, there's a human crisis, there's an economic crisis, there's a governance crisis, there's a health crisis. There's a lot going on right now. And in fact, if we are not rethinking and quickly adjusting to the new way of work and life, for many businesses, for many individuals, communities, particularly those on the bottom of the pyramid, I mean, the reality is that they will not come out of this. So I think the urgency is there more so than ever.
Thanks, Esther. Another question I wanted to ask was, why do you think that the journey to become more sustainable, particularly for sort of smaller and medium-sized businesses, can feel so daunting? And maybe I'll put this to Dave as an SME and very much sort of on that journey.
Yeah, so I think it can be daunting because it makes you reevaluate your entire product and service and how you deliver it. So we're an air conditioning firm, and so we were one of the big bad polluters. I mean, air conditioning is consumes huge amounts of energy all over the world. So we had this issue that we wanted to give better environments for people, but at the same time, how do you mitigate those negative impacts? And they're quite significant. So, you know, we had to completely redesign our business model. So, you know, we used to sell air conditioning just as a turnkey contractor. And then we, based on sustainability and some of the other things our customers were telling us, we had to rethink it and servitize it. And so now we sell it as a service. And we therefore brought a lot of these KPIs of sustainability into the business model. But that was a massive shift. So we did it 6 or 7 years ago. We had to completely change all of our divisions. Our company looks nothing like what it did previously. And that can be scary because, you know, SMEs don't necessarily have all this you know, cash in the bank and all these customers they worry about if they change what will happen. So I think that can be daunting. And from the MNC side, it can also be daunting because you have all this legacy. You have factories that are producing things in a certain way and you have 100 years of doing business and you now all of a sudden need to change it. So I think that's why it's daunting. But what COVID has showed us and what a lot of people are seeing now is it's equally daunting to be non-relevant to your customers. And that can happen just as quickly and in fact more quickly.
Absolutely. Can I ask the same question to Esther? Because Esther, obviously you guys work really closely with Singapore Business Forum. And what are you hearing from small and medium-sized businesses here in Singapore and across the region? What do they feel are the sort of barriers and challenges?
Well, I think immediately right now they are figuring out, well, it's a survival issue right now. But at the same time, it is also, our stance is right now is also the time to prepare and get ready when the economy is recovering. Do not waste this time to adjust how you do business, moving from outcome driven to impact driven, right? So when you talk about the SDGs and the 10 principles, anchor that to your business strategies and operations so that it can wither change, it can be more resilient. I think that overwhelmed SMEs are overwhelmed by just a lot of information that's out there, right? They often sit in forums and whatnot, get examples from, I think, larger companies that have the luxury of having a whole sustainability team, hire consultants, etc., to help them create a very good communication report, sustainability report, so they can use that as a way to communicate to their investors, internal, various stakeholders. Many SMEs just do not have that resource. So from our end is trying to get them to do two things: a mindset change and also a mindset shift and a skill set shift too, right? So equipping them with more knowledge about different sustainability aspects, but also identifying what's relevant for them, so it doesn't become too overwhelming, so that they can, even as a small company like CARE, take sustainability leadership to a next level. And I think there's a lot of resonance and relatability when another fellow SME can talk about how they have taken a stand in changing from outcome-driven company to an impact-driven company.
Thanks, Esther. And from SME to MNC, John, obviously your journey has been a long one, as you mentioned when you were talking to us at the beginning of this event. How do you think the MNC experience differs from the SME experience, beyond the sort of obvious points around maybe having more money to spend on, you know, making those sustainable changes?
Yeah, thanks. Look, it's not so much about having money to spend because, you know, we're an amalgamation of a lot of little businesses, even, you know, individuals talking to clients. There's a lot of dislocation that takes place in this process where, you know, those conversations need to shift pretty dramatically. And that takes a fair amount of vision. You know, somebody needs to sit and think about moving the firm to where they need to be, where we need to be in 2030 or 2050. And as David said, it takes listening to your clients or your stakeholders, your clients, your investors, government, regulatory bodies. You need to just see, and it's very clear the direction of travel here, how the world's shifting. And it satisfies our own sense of purpose. You know, we need to know that we act in a position of trust with depositors. We redeploy those funds to the economy broadly, and the economy broadly is heading in this direction, and we need to be a big part of that. So it's every bit as dislocating getting through it, but it's super exciting about what the opportunity brings. Because you know that your stakeholders are along for the ride as well.
Thanks, John. And Andy, what's your experience as an agency working with a lot of big global clients who, some of which are sort of in the middle of their sustainability journey, some of which are right at the beginning? Sort of what do you hear from them when they first come along to us and ask for our help? Like, what are the concerns and challenges that are really facing them?
I think sometimes it comes from a sort of marketing perspective. They want to have a nice story to tell, and that can be a useful lever because you can get sort of stuff out there and force the change. But I think it's a much more sophisticated conversation now that they do understand what the material issues are in their business, and that they've got to the point where they have started doing that analysis. And I do think there are lessons there for SMEs in terms of this whole area can feel overwhelming. Yet the starting point is think, okay, what of all this, what is material to my business? You know, if I'm air conditioning servicing, that points to what's material for me. I don't need to address everything, but what is material to me? And then the second point is a lot of these skills are new, but a lot of them are the same. I mean, understanding where your customers are going, understanding what motivates your workforce and what your employer brand is, understanding how you get your supply chains working so they will continue to work and you can trust them for the next 5 years. Those are all skills that exist in business. And I think sometimes it's sort of taking a step back and applying those skills to these new questions. And I couldn't agree more with the point that I think Dave made, that the SMEs can pivot more easily. You're not stuck with legacy in quite the same way as the big MNCs. And it is possible if you sort of take a step back, look at what's material for me, look at the skills I do have in the business that I can apply to these, and just think about how those work in the new world.
Thanks, Andy. Before we open up, we have got some questions in from the audience, but I'd like to ask the panel if you would like to ask a question to one of your fellow panelists.
Yeah, I'll go. I had one for Andy, actually. I thought it was really interesting what you were saying around communicating, making more money, because if it's a charitable, endeavor, it might go away. How do you find that some of the customers react to that? Because one thing we always talk about is, you need to integrate sustainability into your metric of how much money you make. That should be, your profit should be aligned to sustainability. So I was just wondering what your experiences are with smaller companies and bigger companies. Do people shy away from that or worry about that? And then how do their customers perceive that?
Yeah, the customers perceive it as people being honest, and that they're not stupid. And when businesses are going out there saying we do this because we love the planet and we've always been committed, I don't think anyone believes it anyway. And if they say we're doing this because it makes business sense to us, that we need a healthy planet because it integrates with all that sort of stuff, I think their customers, I've only seen, as long as people communicate it tactfully and there's not sort of ridiculous, it's fine. I think there's a real, it's much slower in the States. The US, the culture of philanthropy and this notion of you make all your money, how the business of the US is business, you make your money however you like it, and then you're expected to give back afterwards. You're expected to, it goes right back to the sort of Pilgrim Fathers. You know, you work really hard creating a business for 6 days, and the seventh day you give your money, you give a bit to the church, and you go to your college and you're expected when you make money to give money back to your college. The chief execs are ostracized if they don't donate a certain amount of their salary, and they don't get to appear at those sort of black tie gala dinners. And people like Bill Gates and Zuckerberg, you know, make your fortune however, and then you're expected to go into philanthropy afterwards. And I think there's a tension between that and actually saying business should engage in society and integrate it more fully. But I simply don't believe, I think if you're out there saying we're doing this for sustainability reasons, then it stays in the sustainability department. If you say we're out there, we're doing this because it will grow our business, then you get the sales department, the finance department, the HR department, they're all on board with it. You have to communicate it in a professional way, and that's where professional communicators can help you. But it's the positive reaction from their end customers was always there. The willingness of companies to do it, I think, has changed exponentially, and most of the ones we talk to now are on board with it, or at least to a certain degree.
Does anyone else on the panel have a view on this topic? Would anyone else like to ask a fellow panelist a question?
I have a question for John. So it's about financing. Singapore earlier last year have put out a stimulus of 2 billion for green financing. I'm interested to know from the bank's perspective, what are the challenges that you face in terms of trying to give loans to SMEs? So what would you like to see SMEs do more of to help banks be able to provide them with more funding?
Yeah, sure, Esther, thanks. Look, in general, the balance at this point is that there's more demand for green products at the investor level than there is from the issuer perspective. So that says that people, whether it's built up from a retail level that invest their savings and 401ks, etc., into funds, that demand pile is asking and seeking green investments. And so the challenge has been to, whether it's at an MNC, having MNCs issue green, or certainly further down the line to the SME level. And in the UK, we've developed, as I mentioned, quite a number of products that satisfy the SME scale. It's really about the efforts that they need to go through to make them an investable green proposition from whatever they're doing now. As it was David who said, if you're building solar panels, it's pretty easy, right? Anything that you do from a bank is going to be tagged as green, but that's not everybody. So that's a real challenge, and it's going to take a little while for people to be able to either carve out components of their business where they're re-greening activities or reinvesting in other greener activities. So the challenge is really on that side, as opposed to there being there's a lot of money that's willing to go into green activities.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions, so I'm going to ask one of them. So, haven't many businesses moved towards disposables and single use in light of the pandemic? Reusables aren't feasible in a COVID world. We've also got less protection of wildlife while government and law enforcement is distracted on COVID. What are the panel's views on this?
I'm happy to have a go on, certainly on the plastic side of that, that absolutely the drive has been away from single-use plastics and all sorts of models around that, as which is, fits in with the SDGs. There has clearly been a pause, a blip in that direction of travel over this sort of the pandemic and the immediate emergency. However, the direction of travel is absolutely away from single-use plastics. And if I look at what all the big retailers, the way they're going, the sort of multinational retailers, the multinational most visible producers of plastics in terms of, you know, the sort of the Unilevers, Danones, PepsiCo, Coke, Nike, even in all those, they're all moving away from single use, and those plans haven't stopped. There is clearly a moment in time where there was a sort of rush, and there has been a sort of very understandable demand for that sort of thing. But it's the direction of travel is the other way, and I suspect it will trigger innovation that helps us sort of meld that health and well-being requirement with the environmental requirement. I'm not sure I have a view on the wildlife question, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Andy. Does anyone else have a view on this question?
Yeah, I think I agree with Andy, and it's kind of like, you know, you see this blip and it's disappointing, but you know, if I use the analogy, if your house is on fire, you do whatever you can to put it out, and a lot of the damage is done by water damage because of the water that was putting out the fire. But I think it was John who was mentioning, how do you come out of this, the sort of the green recovery? And, you know, I think we had to dedicate all those resources to COVID. It was the most important thing. Sustainability wasn't important if there was no one here to benefit from it. But at the same time, now we have to find those opportunities to leapfrog. If we've started at a base and anything goes and anything can be disrupted, how do we recover and come out of that in a more sustainable way? And how does that, in regard to anything, plastics, wildlife, how we invest our time, resources, awareness, all of the above.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, I have another question. Firstly, a thank you to Esther for sharing the personal carbon footprint calculator. This is from Kapila, who says they find it very interesting. They also have a question for all of you. What works better, the onus on an entity, so a country or a corporate, or the individual?
I'm happy to take a stab at it first. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think tone from the top is important. So that comes from leadership at the corporate level, leadership at the national governmental level, to incentivize, to motivate, in some ways to penalize as well, people to do better, right? To act in a certain way. But let's not forget also the voices of the people, right? And particularly I highlight, you know, the, if you think about, you know, Greta Thunberg and what she managed to do in terms of gathering voices, right? And the younger generation now demanding different type of products and services, right? The individual level is very powerful. And when you add that up, there is a compounding effect. And I think companies, right, are listening to that. Back to, you know, Andy mentioned about employee engagement, right? Now with social media, with the ease of information, if the tone from top is not right, very quickly it's going to get out there and you're going to see that market price plummet. So I think it's working in concert. It's about listening to the stakeholders and understanding that you as an individual have a responsibility, right? And you are, as an individual, part of a much larger ecosystem for the community and also for the nation. So I think let's not leave it to other people, but take it in our own hands in any way that's possible.
Yeah, I think I could say too, if I understand the question properly, all three of those are critical to this movement and getting to where we need to be in a decade or more. But if a government is not voicing the right and making the right sounds and doing the right things and giving a voice to the individuals who want to act on their own volition, who want a place to put their money, you know, to support green initiatives or environmental initiatives, and corporates are constrained because government are continuing to, you know, not pass legislation outlawing certain things or whatever it is. You know, it makes it a lot more difficult when governments are not supportive. That's clear. But when all three are aligned, which is, you know, the goals of Paris, and we'll see what comes out of Glasgow next year, but when all three are aligned, it's a very powerful thing. And that's, I think, where we're at for most of the planet at the moment.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, and I think just building on that a little bit. So, you know, if you look at country versus corporate versus individual, depending on the particular instance you're talking about, we did have different roles to play and we all have to be engaged. But you can also look at what lends itself to a country or these big global organizations like Esther's. So, you know, getting data and creating awareness, countries and organizations are great at that. Then the individuals can use that and they can be empowered to demand action. And I think that's the one thing we don't focus enough on, is that if you can empower a consumer to demand action, then businesses will take the action. So I think there's a real role to play on, you know, individuals and consumers for really getting themselves educated and asking their businesses, asking their governments, what are they doing, because it's important to them. And then the businesses sort of fit in the middle and then they take the action.
Thanks, David.
Yeah.
Andy.
I think it's very difficult to expect individuals to make changes if they don't think everyone else is. I mean, that's one hell of a sacrifice. I think I'm going to be the one person who sort of really changes my behaviors and brings sustainable behaviors into it, or whatever. So they have, you know, and we are social beings, and we have to believe that we're part of the herd and other people are doing things. And government and business can provide frameworks where we think we want to be part of a bigger group. However, the ability now for individuals to come together and be seen together, and we've seen it with Black Lives Matter, we've seen it with Greta Thunberg, all those things. There is an individual ability now to coalesce and to feel we're not the only ones in this, and I want to be part of this movement. I want to be part of doing this change. So I think individual changes can sort of rise up much more quickly and with much more possibility now. And then the onus falls on governments and businesses to meet what their voters and consumers are demanding.
Thanks, Andy. We have another question which is related to that topic. How does a company push for a sustainability agenda when the government is slow or playing the waiting game?
I think there's competitive advantage. I think you sort of you need to find where your competitive advantage can be in there, and there's obviously costs involved, but there will be a place where you can find competitive advantage there. And it might be that you find you sort of are able to attract better talent. It might be how it helps you with certain customers. There may be cost savings you can identify in your supply chain when you look at materiality. I think there's also some very interesting plays now around access to finance and the cheaper finance and the better terms in finance available. If you're able to demonstrate ESG elements to that. So I think you sort of, and then the pressure on government to follow. I think if we all wait for governments to act, governments are clearly part of the solution, but we can't just wait for them.
Thanks, Andy.
I'll just add that, oh, sorry, Esther, but, you know, where governments are supportive, I agree, you know, in some countries you can wait for a political cycle maybe for governments to change, but that's not all cases. But when governments are super supportive, and I would say Singapore, putting Singapore in that camp, you know, it can be really helpful to the process, whether it's grants and just, you know, the articulation of the objective makes it so much easier for people to buy into.
And I just want to highlight that the engine to the global economy are businesses. So there is a huge, a lot of power in this collective voice. And I think if you're an early trailblazer in sustainability, you know, agree with what Andy said, use that to your competitive advantage, right? Talk about that, market that, and also talk to government about it, because they are also listening and they can learn, right? Maybe they're slow, but use your data, use that to drive your argument for why sustainability matter and why certain policies need to change, because it's the right thing to do, because it'll spur economy. There's a lot of reasons for them to take a stance. And Singapore, the Singapore government is one of the most supportive ones.
Thanks, Esther. We have another question just come in. Will companies be seeking talent knowledgeable in sustainability?
I could take a stab at this as well. I think increasingly so. I mean, in my desire world, you know, not to shoot myself in the foot here, I hope that there isn't necessarily a need for a chief sustainability officer, because everybody is flying, you know, the flag high for sustainability. You know, the people who are talking about sustainability are the CFOs, CSOs, what have you. They all know something. They are all thinking sustainability and what that means for their division and business. But so we are seeing more from companies seeking interns, asking for more information about how they can scale up their staff on sustainability. So I think is yes, but it doesn't sit with, you know, one person who's there to learn everything about sustainability. I really encourage that, you know, it is something, an area matter that all staff, right, should take more interest in and be armed about, especially if there's a particular, you know, facet of sustainability that matters to them the most.
Thanks, Esther.
Yeah, I really love that point, and I think, you know, if I talk about care as an example, bringing people with a sustainability expertise or skill set is one thing, but the other thing, which I think Esther was alluding to, is it's also about mindset, because it's everyone that comes into your business. So when we're interviewing people and hiring people, we generally ask the first question is, do they believe what we believe? Do they have the same vision and passion that we have as a business? Because that's how they'll fit within our business. And more sustainability is coming into that because it's incorporated into our business model and what we do and the customers that we have. So if they don't have that mindset, they actually won't fit within our culture and they won't fit within our customers. So I think, yeah, having a mindset throughout the organization. And then obviously you need the guys with the skill set for particular industry specific skill sets for sustainability as well. But that's a great point. I think we should focus on as well.
As yeah, I certainly agree with both those thoughts. There's a couple of other things. What I don't think, you do need this expertise in the business, but it can't be kind of divorced from business savviness. I mean, the two things have to go together. I don't think we necessarily, businesses need people who are all out sustainability at all costs, regardless of business, and business is sort of an evil that needs to be trodden down. I don't think that particularly helps anyone. The other interesting thing going on is that's often the question to sort of putting Dave's point in reverse. The question when people are joining us, they're checking us out to, are we in line with their values and their beliefs? And I think that's you know, companies want to attract the right talent. They need to sort of, it's part of that agenda now as well.
Thanks. Okay, next question. The B Corp movement seems like a great way to identify companies that are walking and talking, and also ties into the SDGs. Do you think we'll see a growth of this movement? And is this a way that consumers can identify companies that are actually doing what they say they are doing?
Happy to talk to that. It was certainly one of the reasons we became a B Corp, was to try and differentiate ourselves from all the other agencies who were out there saying, talking the talk, and we wanted to walk the walk as well. And I think the B Corp movement is certainly growing. It is, I think that there's huge numbers of SMEs who have become B Corps, and more and more multinationals looking at it. It's a bit more complicated for multinationals who have listing requirements, but not impossible, and more of those are coming in. But I think whether it's B Corp, whether it's signing up to the Global Compact, I think all these things that actually force companies to walk the walk will grow. Whether B Corp is the sort of final be all and end all number one standard for that, I don't know. I think it's one of them, but certainly as a construct, the checking of companies and the sort of third-party expert proof points that they are who they say they are is important and will grow.
Thanks, Andy. Anyone else got a thought on this question? Okay.
I can't say that I'm overly familiar with B Corps, to be honest, but what I'd say is, and I think it's getting to the point, is that external validation is important in a lot of these activities, and You know, everybody wants to be doing the right thing, but the world can be a funny place and things can change. What was issued initially as a sustainable activity may in 5 years not be considered so. And so there needs to be an element of audit and verification and principles applied. So I think that may be just getting it to the answer from our perspective. It's an important part.
And in fact, B Corp partnered with UNGC to develop a set of guidelines as well for companies to set their benchmarks and standards. So you also see a lot of these organizations coming together and collaborating to help companies get, I guess, accredited, certified, and really walk the talk, right? And to giving them a license to operate. I think this will, some level of standardization will also help from the investors to know that at least there are some checks and balances before they go deeper into kind of their own evaluation frameworks for financing.
Thanks, Esther. Okay, we have a question from Rebecca Kershaw. How do we weigh up the trade-off between the cost of certification and the trends of greenwashing?
So maybe I can try and take that one. So, I mean, in the built environment, we see that quite a lot. I mean, greenwashing, which is people getting plaques and saying you're sustainable versus the point of being sustainable. And there's always this way up of, do you go for the checklist, which gets you the plaque on the wall, or do you go for what's the most going to give you the most impact? I think if you're evaluating that on behalf of your own business, you should focus 100% on the impact first. Once you have your sustainability incorporated into your business and into your processes and the way that you do your business, you will then ultimately be able to get the certifications quite easily. And I would definitely do it that way around, because I've also found in a lot of the different certifications, it's possible to get the certification without having the impact. So I would recommend doing it that way around.
Thanks, Dave. Does anyone else have a view on this?
Yeah, I'd just say that I think there's still a lot of maturity to come around this point. And, you know, as global regulators, government bodies develop greater taxonomy around what's considered green in different situations, certainly from the way that we look at business and the way that we can frame that in a finance perspective, it's still in an infancy. And regulators, I mentioned PRA putting out a supervisory statement around the activities that we've got to try and assess. You know, we're not held fully to quantitative standards at this point, nor is a lot of other industries. And so it's going to be an ongoing process, I think, to get to a point where we can feel comfortable in all instances of not being subject to greenwashing. But, you know, there's a lot of integrity in what people are trying to do, but you can imagine too that there's going to be a lot of instances where people want to cut corners because it's going to cost, it costs, right? As the question sort of alluded to. So we're at early stages of really getting to a much more confident position around everybody's statements and, you know, on their greenness, if you like.
And the measurement point's interesting, and then as exactly as John says, it is at an early stage, a sort of immature stage in that taxonomy and how things are measured and how things are called. And there is an analogy to accounting standards. And late part of the 19th century, early 20th century, there were huge numbers of different accountancy standards that applied to different types of business. And there was lots of argument saying, no, you can't measure us the same as that business because it's a different business. You can't measure the same things. They need separate standards. And then the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression happened. And that argument over separate standards changed. And we moved to sort of core global accountancy standards, or certainly in the States, and then from that. And I'm sure we will, whether COVID and sort of climate emergency will accelerate that move towards generally accepted standards. I suspect the leadership for that will come from the financial industry and from investors demanding, if they are increasingly, which they are, putting ESG criteria towards the heart of investment decisions, they're going to want to be able to see what's what and they will certainly look through greenwashing.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, another question Sustainability is also relevant to supply chains, and COVID has shown how weak supply chains can be due to over-reliance. What would be your advice on creating a more sustainable supply chain?
I think that the one is certainly the bigger companies, and this probably goes right the way through. You are responsible for your supply chain. And the point, sort of analogous to the point John made in terms of Barclays' impacts, that's not just their impacts themselves, it goes to the people they're investing. So certainly every MNC is aware that they are responsible for what's going on in their supply chains for two reasons. One is the security of supply. You need to make sure they're sustainable in that sense, that you are going to continue to get supply, therefore your business depends on it, so you have a responsibility to it. But secondly is they're no longer allowed by pressure groups, by individuals, by social media to say, oh, that's our supplier, that what's going on in that sweatshop, what's going on in that plantation is nothing to do with us because it's a different company. That doesn't wash anymore. So they are having to take responsibility for that. And actually that responsibility does start to lead to a different way of working in terms of partnerships with competitors, potentially who are sort of sourcing palm oil from the same plantations, or with NGOs who are operating on the ground there and understand what's going on, either the environmental issues there or human rights issues there, and with government and local and national governments in place. And that partnership approach, I think, is critical to that. But the two drivers for business have to be the security of supply and the preservation of their reputation.
I think there needs to be an increasing focus on engaging the SMEs on building sustainable and resilient supply chains. What COVID has also shown us is how symbiotic relationship between the MNCs and SMEs in supply chains. It's for a country like Singapore, it's a question of labor. It's also a question of all the intermediaries, right? So I think more attention needs to be placed from the government, but also intergovernmental agencies like the UN to support SMEs in building sustainable supply chain.
Thanks, Esther. Okay, I think we have time for one last question before we close the panel. And it's a question from me to all of you. If you had to give one piece of advice to a business that was just starting out on its sustainability journey, what would it be?
From me, it would be A, well done, and B, really think clearly about how it relates to your business and how it fits with your business plans and your business growth plans and your ambitions for the business. Identify how the two things fit together, where the circles overlap. That's key for me.
Thanks, Andy.
I would echo that. I think at the SME level, it is all about, you need to stay in business. So you need to be really thoughtful about how to make this work. Stay close to your clients. That works at the MNC level as well. Your clients are like-minded by and large, and so they will support you and help you get through it if you're offering a product that satisfies both the profit motive and the end objective around being more sustainable.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, I would say that the two people you should really involve right at the beginning is your CEO and your CFO. Anything that you do from a CEO perspective or your organization perspective in being more sustainable has to be from the top in terms of business direction, and it has to make you more money. So your CFO really needs to be aligned to it. And once you do that, engage your customers and engage your people. I think, we went through this journey and we were surprised at how our teams and our people were waiting for us to make this journey and make this jump. And we were sort of going to them saying, we're going to do this. And the response was always almost, what took you so long? So I think talk to your people, and then once you've got the guys at the top aligned, and you'll see all the guys throughout your company are aligned, then start taking small steps. Make one step today, one step tomorrow. Look at redoing your business model, and it's a continuous journey. And to that point, I'd say don't try and hit a benchmark. Don't try and say, I'm going to just do this by this time. Just try and get better all of the time. And then you'll find you very quickly reach that benchmark, and then you'll probably go past it.
Thanks, Dave. Esther?
Yeah, so I agree with what the rest of the panelists have mentioned, and it's about just doing something. It can feel overwhelming. There's a lot to be done, but once you've identified what's really material, what's really going to make your company move the needle, one, if not several sustainability development goals, focus on that. Set some targets, and they are moving targets. Like what Dave said, you want to be, improving and rethinking, re-strategizing, and shaping the way you do things, and holding yourself as a company accountable, right? In meeting those targets and then doing further. So I think my one wish is that, everyone just do something, no matter how small.
Great. Thanks so much, Esther. Okay, that just leaves me to say thank you to all of our panelists. It's been such an insightful and interesting discussion. Lots for our audience to digest and take away and think about. So I'd like to say thanks to Esther Chang, John Laws, Dave McKernis, and Andy Last for joining us today. I'm now just going to take you through some of our upcoming chamber events that we have going on. So we've got another webinar coming up next week, which is an introduction to digital forensics. Ooh, sounds very interesting. Then we've got another sustainability focused event at the end of this month, which is on climate change and financial risk. And then in July, we've got Jim Collins doing a webinar on good to great. And then we also have a big moment for the British Chamber here in Singapore, which is their annual Business Awards. That will be on the 29th of October. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we can have a gala dinner. We can actually all be in the same room with each other. And you can see there the categories for this year. So please do think about entering, check out on the website the criteria. We'd very much like you to participate if you see a category that you think is right for you and your business. We'd love to know what you think about this event, and there will be a feedback email sent to you, everyone who attended today. Please do fill it in, because only by telling us how you found an event do we continue to improve and get better. So thank you so much for everyone who joined us today. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it some practical help if you're on your sustainability journey, and whichever point you might be on that journey. Thank you very much. Stay safe and healthy.